Now this is a term. Now we have to talk about a term called micturition. So what is micturition? It is a fancy, or also known as voiding, fancy term for peeing. So uresis, aka urination. So micturition is voiding, is uresis is urination, aka peeing in layman's term. So how do you know when you need to micturate? Because you know when you need to use the restroom, right? But what do you feel? You usually feel a pressure in your bladder, right? So the thing is that you have something called the micturition reflex. So it's not important in just urination and voiding. It's also important in sending the signals that tell you, hey, you have a lot built up in there. Let's find a safe place to urinate. Okay, so if you remember your reflexes, what do reflexes involve? Well, they involve sensing some signals. In the terms of the patellar reflex, you have some sort of sensory neuron that detects something, carries it to your central nervous system. Now, review that central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord. So sensory neuron is going to say, hey, I detect something, let's go to the central nervous system. And then central nervous system sends something that signals back. And in this case where it's a motor neuron, and this motor neuron is going to activate this muscle in this reflex and then cause it to contract and cause an effect. So reflexes, it has a sensory part, but it also has a motor part that carries out the response in response to that initial signal. Now, what we have with the micturition reflex is that what's the signal? Well, again, this is why you when you need to use the restroom, you kind of feel that pressure, right? So when it happens is if you build up fluid, it's like what happens if you inflate a balloon? What happens to the air pressure inside the balloon? Or if you fill up a water balloon with water, what happens to the pressure of the water inside the balloon? As you have more, fill it up more and more, you have more pressure, right? So these are going to activate baroreceptor neurons that detect pressure. So these neurons that detect pressure and stretch, these are going to send signals to your central nervous system. So these stretch receptors are going to end up like sending, well, actually has a multiple path. So these stretch receptors are going to first send the signal to the spinal cord, and through a series of synapses, is going to synapse and innervate these parasympathetic nerves. And these parasympathetic nerves innervate what we call the internal urethral sphincter. And again, sphincter is a ring of muscle. So in its default state, or well, when you're not trying to use the restroom, this sphincter is closed. When it's closed, it's contracted. But what this parasympathetic nerve is going to do, well, call back all the way back to PHYL 141 and the end of PHYL 141 where we talked about sympathetic versus parasympathetic. So remember, parasympathetic, so in terms of urination, is it associated with the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system? Let's ask the chat. So urination and diuresis, is that associated with parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system? Yeah, parasympathetic. Yeah, so parasympathetic, remember, like, sympathetic is the fight or flight system, parasympathetic is rest and digest, and also using the restroom as well. So parasympathetic nerves are going to be conducive to using the restroom. So what is it going to do here with the internal urethral sphincter? It's going to relax it. That's what these parasympathetic nerves do. So the more urine that builds up, it's going to send signals via this reflex arc that activate parasympathetic nerves that cause the internal urethral sphincter to relax. Now, are you going to use the restroom yet? Luckily, you have another urethral sphincter. You have the external urethral sphincter. And so the cool thing about your bladder is it's like the anus and rectum. You have a double ziplock seal. So even though one seal is broken right here with the urethral sphincter opening, you're not going to use the restroom yet because, again, this doesn't involve control yet. This is a reflex. So if that didn't happen, then you would be urinating as soon as you detect some stretch. Thankfully, you have the external urethral sphincter. So the other interesting thing too is that it's not just about the urethral sphincter. Your bladder also has muscle that surrounds it. And this muscle is called the detrusor muscle. And what happens is that these stretch receptors are going to send signals that tell this muscle to contract. Now, what's that going to do? Well, think about it this way. if if you have kids, or if you have like little nephews or cousins or nieces, and they're like trying pretend like you're kind of like feeling okay, I might have to use the restroom soon, and they start like and they're playing on you and they're jumping on your abdomen and you're trying to jump on your bladder. What if someone starts to push some pressure on your bladder? What's that going to do? It's going to make you want to go even more, right? So that's what's going to happen here. You not only get the relaxing of the sphincters, but you also get further increase in pressure because of this muscle contracting and causing the additional pressure inside your bladder. Now, what do you want to do? You want to get to the bathroom real quick. But again, we don't have brain involvement yet. The good thing is that these stretch receptors also lead up into your brain. Now, this part isn't a reflex because why? It's going to your cerebral cortex, the part that's involved in your consciousness and your decision making as well. So this is why when you have the increased pressure, you're kind of like, oh shoot, I might need to use the restroom soon, because this is the part that's actually reaching your conscious brain in charge of actually making decisions. So this is where you can finally go to the restroom, find somewhere safe to void. And yeah, so this is what causes here. These stretch receptors tell you like alarm bells, I need to go right now. Okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to find somewhere that's very safe and where you can actually void. And now even though I'm showing it outside the spinal cord, I'm just showing it this pathway just for clarity's sake. So now you can actually send voluntary signals that say, okay, I want to actually do additional pressure to force the urine out. But now that I'm actually at the toilet or somewhere safe where I can void, I can finally relax this external urethral sphincter and then let loose. So again, you have that initial warning signal, but once you're ready to do that, this is why you can finally control when you actually urinate. But you can also do additional pressure. Like you can, I won't get too graphic here, but you can increase the pressure of the stream if you want, right? So this is why you have the involuntary part that lets loose, that opens the first gate. But to actually let loose completely, you need to do voluntary control and release of the second gate, and also cause you can adjust the pressure as well. You have all these nerves here. What if you damage the nerves that are involved in controlling this? If you sever these nerves, then some of this stuff might actually end up, this will affect control of the sphincters, control of pressure, and the detrusor muscle that helps to regulate the pressure surrounding the bladder. So if you have surgery and then somehow these nerves get damaged, or the muscle gets damaged, or any of these tissues or structures get damaged, that can affect whether someone can urinate. Or in very severe cases, like if you have like a quadriplegic or a paraplegic, that can also affect that, because if you cut off, lose control of certain segments of the spinal cord, everything downstream can be affected as well. So the typical, if you're going to medicine or nursing, the important segments or spinal roots to know are the sacral 2 to sacral 4, so S2 to S4. And why? Because they're the roots of this special nerve we call the pudendal nerve. And that nerve is actually very important in regulating not only the functions of in terms of they're involved in both diuresis and defecation, so number 1 and number 2, and also the reproductive organs as well. So this is why it's very important it's very important that these, if anything affects these nerves that affect the sacral region, it could result in incontinence. Anesthesia affectability, yeah, that can affect it too, because anesthesia, the whole purpose of that is to change the activity of the nerves that affect pain, right? And also motility too in surgery as well. So if anesthesia can affect the ability to urinate as well, if it's affecting the nerves that control urination and micturition. Okay, but very fascinating question.